Aloha, Reject Nation. It's Greg Alba here.
Aloha as well. I'm John.
We're going to watch today a patron video request, one of the reward tiers. You know how it goes. The Chilling Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Michel?
Either way, this is a very horrific story. I've read about this.
No idea who this is. From BuzzFeed Blue, BuzzFeed Unsolved, requested from none other than Natalie Doran.
I like these guys.
So we're about to discuss a case of demonic possession so chilling and controversial that it actually became the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Oh.
Which is the true story that inspired that.
Oh.
The Exorcism of Michel. Ooh. It's one of the few actual cases of demonic possession that went to court.
All right.
Wait,
did they sue the demon?
Okay.
Born in 1952 in the small town of Klingenberg in Bavaria, Germany, Anneliese Michel was raised as a strict Catholic and was described as very bright and likable. In September 1968, when Anneliese was 16 years old, she experienced her first episode of losing consciousness, and later that night, she felt as if something was pressing down on her chest, pinning her to her bed. 11 months later, in August 1969, a similar event occurred, and her mother took Anneliese to their family doctor, Dr. Vogt, and a neurologist, Dr. Luthi, who examined her and even ran an EEG, a brain scan, but found nothing wrong. They hypothesized that it could possibly be a form of seizure. Over the next 3 years, Anneliese would have 2 more similar episodes and was prescribed 2 medications, an anticonvulsant medication and an anti-seizure medication called Dilantin. On both occasions, an EEG would come back normal, with some minor irregular patterns, but nothing that would definitively explain her symptoms.
What year was this?
This was in 1969.
Okay, I'm fine with that so far. That sounds real. Sorry if I blew it on you.
Well, you did.
It was in spring 1973 that things took a turn for the stranger. Anneliese began to hear knocking sounds in her bedroom, sounds her sisters would hear as well. But even more alarming, Anneliese also reported hearing a voice damning her to hell. Her mother was further rattled when she witnessed Anneliese furiously staring at a statue of the Virgin Mary with, quote, eyes turned black, jet black, and her hands seemed to turn into thick paws with claws.
What? Those are chunky paws on her daughter.
Oh, you know what? Let's move on. Let's not get caught up on the bare hands. I shouldn't have even said that part.
Yeah, we can't move past her having paws.
I knew you were going to like that. I'm just
She
going
had
to move
little
past.
kitty cat paws.
In September 1973, in a neurological visit with Dr. Luthi, Anneliese described horrific visions of demon faces that were tormenting her and stated that she felt the devil was inside her. She also reported smelling something that had the aroma of burnt feces, a stench that many around her would report smelling at later times.
Why do all these people know what burnt feces is?
Feces was a little smoky.
You're gonna pee?
See what you get? This is what you get. Yes, take him.
Around this time, Anneliese's mother described these strange occurrences to Dr. Luthi, who, according to Mrs. Michel, advised them to consult a Jesuit, a claim that Dr.
neurologist
Luthi would later deny.
That doctor.
Yeah, if he said that,
Don't go see it.
that's fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not the family definitely searched for a priest and eventually found a priest named Father Alt. In November 1973, Anneliese met with a Freudian psychiatrist who diagnosed her as a neurotic with possible epilepsy, and another neurologist found she had, quote, epileptic patterns, and took her off Dilantin and put her on Tegretol, a much stronger drug. In July 1975, Anneliese's extremely odd behavior worsened. She barely slept and prayed fervently all night. She ate spiders and flies, and even licked her own urine up from the floor. She destroyed rosaries, crucifixes, and holy pictures on the walls. Anneliese also exhibited strength that was, quote, close to superhuman, throwing her sister, quote, as if she were a rag doll, and incredibly was observed effortlessly squeezing an apple with one hand until, quote, fragments exploded throughout the room.
I bet I could squeeze an apple till it
I
exploded.
bet you $1 million you couldn't.
Here we go. I mean, this is Germany. This is before preservatives.
You hear that in the distance? It's the excuse train coming.
But now you get to see 2 hands.
What? She definitely used 2 hands.
One hand.
But still, that's not like an amazing metric.
A priest named Father Rodewick, a man considered an expert on exorcisms by his peers, reported that he was convinced that Anneliese was possessed, and after deliberation with the bishop, an exorcism on Anneliese was formally approved. It was to be carried out by a priest named Father Renz. On September 24th, 1975, the first exorcism rite was performed. Father Renz allowed some of the exorcism sessions to be recorded, and 42 audio recordings of the exorcisms were made in total. I'm gonna play some clips from those recordings, but fair warning, these recordings are perhaps the most disturbing pieces of audio I've ever heard.
She is Hispanic.
You know, she's screaming. She's giving it 110%. I mean,
Do you think that sounds like it came out of a girl? Like,
yes, it sounds like a girl doing a funny voice.
your unrelenting skepticism is exhausting. It drains me of all happiness and energy. And I hope you know that. That's all. We're all here. I ran out of evil people to think of. The blonde man from Die Hard is also here. Skeletor from Masters of the Universe. Heath Ledger's Joker. Not Jack Nicholson. He was too cartoonish. Is that your fun?
Yeah, I've had my fun with it.
Okay.
Anneliese also named Fleischmann as one of her demons and provided accurate details of the real Fleischmann, who was a priest in the 1500s that was kicked out of the church for bad behavior. These details
Bad
came as an
behavior.
icy shock to Father Alt, who claims Anneliese would have no way of knowing Fleischmann.
That is the only thing that is strange to me. All the other stuff is just things that a person could do.
To learn more about demonic possession, we sat down with Father Gary Thomas, a Vatican-approved exorcist, who explained to us different signs of possession. All of these Anneliese had.
One would be an aversion to the sacred. So a person walks in this church and can't look at a crucifix, and you only see the whites of their eyes. Another would be knowledge of hidden things, where the demon will begin to tell you things about yourself that the person himself would have no way of knowing. Another would be possessing a kind of inordinate physical strength they don't normally possess. The last sign is sort of epileptic-like seizures on a person's face and the movement of their arms and legs in a way where they lose complete control.
By May, Anneliese became even worse, banging her head against the wall and biting herself and others, to the point where her family had to tie her up to prevent her from hurting herself.
Sounds like
But most
The
dangerously,
Exorcist.
Anneliese refused to eat. She described it as, quote, not being permitted to eat. Despite being quite frail, likely weighing under 80 pounds, she exhibited great strength when people tried to restrain her.
Yeah, I just feel bad for her at this point.
Yeah, I do feel bad for
She's
her.
definitely tortured.
By her face was sunken. She also refused a doctor visit, even though she had a very high fever. On June 30th, Anneliese had another exorcism, only saying please, absolution. The next morning, her family went to her room and found her dead.
Wow.
Despite seeking medical attention early on, Anneliese refused to submit to medical attention in the end, as she and her family ultimately placed all faith of recovery into the exorcisms. She died of starvation at the age of 23 after 67 exorcisms, and only 68 pounds at the time of her death.
Do you think that just made her, like, buy into it more? If people started exercising me on the reg,
Exercising you in the reg?
yeah, I might eventually be like, I guess I'm demons.
I would agree with that in my mind, but Annaliese's belief that she was possessed predates
Yeah, all the
the exorcisms or the priests or any of that stuff.
After her death, Annaliese's parents and the two priests were accused of negligent homicide, and the case went to trial in 1978.
Damn.
What follows are the two sides of that case. First, let's review the position of the defense. The defense presented eyewitness testimony and formally submitted the recordings as evidence of possession, an idea that the court never seemed to take seriously.
Jeez.
From a non-religious standpoint, the defense argued Anneliese was permitted to deny medical treatment, as was her lawful right. For what it's worth, medical treatment might have included tranquilizing her, force-feeding her, and electroshock therapy. Quote, all presumably against her will, end quote. Family friend Thea Hine recalled in her testimony that in 1976, a A few months before Anneliese's death, Anneliese reportedly, quote, begged on her knees for Hein to not suggest medical attention to anybody. Also worth noting is the fact that Father Alt actually looked for medical help towards the end. And on May 30th, his friend Dr. Richard Roth visited Anneliese out of what he claims was scientific curiosity and not as a physician.
He just was like, look, I'm not here as a doctor. I want to see some of this crazy shit.
Who fucking says that?
I want to see this girl eat some spiders.
That's like something you say when you go to the zoo. Not when you go see someone that's tied up.
That is a bad man right there.
Okay. In his visit, Dr. Roth claims Anneliese had no external injuries, although Father Renz noted she had several bruises, a swollen cheek, and black eyes. An interesting contradiction, to say the least. Dr. Roth also denied saying, quote, there are no injections against the devil, end quote.
Shady.
Shady as fuck.
Yeah.
Curiously, in spite of all the supposed epileptic attacks, an autopsy revealed Anneliese had a healthy brain with no damage that could have caused epileptic seizures. Quote, not even on a microscopic level, end quote.
What say you to that?
I mean, you know, I'm not a what's a brain scientist?
A neurologist?
There we go. Sorry, it's been a long day. I'm not a neurologist. I don't know what the...
It's funny that you said that because the neurologist said the exact same thing.
He said I'm not a neurologist?
Probably it sounds like it. You might as well.
Look,
I don't know. Go visit a Jesuit.
Just get your shit stink out of my office.
And even more curious was the court's seeming non-consideration of facts, such as her pupils being unusually dilated and the absence of ulcers on her body, which are frequently found in victims of starvation.
Okay, all right.
Any quotes on that?
I mean, you know...
This is great. The tables have turned, in my opinion.
Now, let's review the position of the prosecution. The prosecution argued that Anneliese had epilepsy and psychosis, and that the parents and two priests were liable for failing to act to save her life. The defense tore down notions of possession. They questioned the credibility of Father Alt, with the conclusion from two experts that Father Alt exhibited signs of schizophrenia.
Whoa!
Yeah, that's weird.
That's weird.
He wasn't the guy that was doing the exorcisms, but he was the guy that initially helped Anneliese in the beginning.
The prosecution also argued that the medications given successfully suppressed the epilepsy-like seizures, and argued that that suppression morphed into, quote, a delusional psychosis associated with epilepsy, end quote. They argued that Anneliese's psychosis was exacerbated by the exorcism, which only played into her fantasy. To piggyback on that, Anneliese often went through phases between exorcisms where she behaved normally. Even though she would behave as a possessed person during exorcisms, it's unclear if the epilepsy-like seizures were stopped by medication or if they actually stopped on their own. But Anneliese's psychotic visions predate the alleged medical suppression.
Weird. Sorry.
Basically, they're saying that the psychosis was brought on by the suppression of the drugs.
Yeah.
But this psychosis predates the drugs. Exactly.
In the end, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution, sentencing the 4 defendants to 6 months in prison with suspension for 3 years and payment for all court costs.
Damn.
The court ruled that Anneliese was unable to make decisions for herself and should have been forced to submit to medical care. Professor Felicitas D. Goodman, an author of a book on the case, notes the theories that Anneliese was epileptic were presented as, quote, a statement of undisputable fact, not conjecture, as in fact they had been, end quote.
How do you tell the difference between possession and mental health?
Sometimes both are going along side by side. You have to determine what is the root cause of the suffering of this individual. You start out with a discernment, and the discernment involves myself and a whole team of people. I have a medical doctor, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist. In fact, a formal exorcism only happens as the last resort.
Given the evidence that we've seen and all the strange occurrences and the voices, I think there's sufficient evidence to not conclusively rule out that she was possessed beyond a reasonable doubt.
Sure.
So you acknowledge that.
I acknowledge there's a lot of factors in this case. I personally think there's something going on with mental health, and I also think that 67 exorcisms probably don't leave your mind in a good spot.
I could see both sides. I could see how it would be mental health. I could see how it would be possession. I lean towards possession. That being said, she should have gone to the hospital.
Yeah, get that girl to a hospital, please.
She's possessed or not, fucking force her to go to the hospital and let the doctors be like, holy shit, the shit's floating around.
PSA, if your kid's seeing spiders.
Don't take him to an exorcist. Take him to an exorcist, but do it at the hospital.
No, don't take them. Take them straight to the hospital.
You can do both. That's what I'm saying. You can do both. You can have it happen at the hospital.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Regardless of the court ruling, many have debated what actually led to Anneliese's death. Was it a case of mental illness, possibly epilepsy? Or was this a legitimate case of demonic possession? Whatever the real reason may be, the case of Anneliese Michel is a tragedy and will always remain unsolved.
Wow. Sort of stinger. Yeah.
I think we're done here.
No, we're not. I'm gonna crush this.
You're not crushing it.
I'm gonna get some juice out of this thing.
I don't know what's making me happier, the fact that you can't get it, or the struggle in your face as you see your case slipping through your fingers.
This
like
is not
grains
the
of
case
sand.
slipping through my fingers.
Just like grains of sand just falling.
Well, John, what do you think?
It's time to squeeze an apple and see which of us can.
Yeah.
I guess I would have to ultimately, because there's everything is so kind of nebulous and it's hard to say. There are, like you said, there are a bunch of factors. I feel like there's probably some kind of hyper, so specific that there's no precedent for it mental thing going on. But at the same time, you know, the mystery of it all does scratch at my mind. I don't really have a conclusion for this. I feel like it could be.
Whatever the prosecution rested on in order to win, if that's all true, that's all true. But then there's other things that they didn't really talk about. What about the superhuman strength stuff? If she really had this superhuman strength, does that come from these forms of epilepsy or seizures or whatever? There's certain things I'm like, well, why didn't they touch on this in the court trial? Does that mean that the parents and the priests were just lying about these incidences? I saw the movie. I don't really remember it. I remember liking it. I remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's all I remember. I don't remember it like spanning so many years of this woman's life. That's what shocked me, was this went on for like a decade or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
Isn't the movie just about the trial itself?
Yeah, and it cuts back and forth between time, so I guess that's why I didn't really register that. But
yeah, but this is like, you realize just how much time and agony was involved in this, because like 67 exorcisms is
regardless, they should have
insane.
taken her to the hospital, even if it was a possession. Like, if the hospital can't fix it, then it would have been like, yeah, this girl's really possessed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it certainly checks off all those boxes of like, we might as well try an exorcism, because there's so much unexplainable. And the prosecution's case, at least if this video is to be believed, it seems like they won based off of facts that weren't entirely accurate, because like some of this started before she was on medication, because that was a compelling argument. But at the same time, I'm like, what about all that stuff from before then, though? Things like knowledge you would never have that you're spouting off, those things make me wonder if it could be something beyond the natural realm.
That's what I wish if we got some word on the whole, I'm sure this trial went on forever. That's something I wish we got some facts on in terms of what the prosecution had to say about those specific incidences. I don't know. It sounds, I think it was real.
It tickles the mysterious edges of your mind. Yeah, I mean, I guess my faculties want to tell me that there has to be some kind of logical something or other at the end of this, but there's so much mystery around it, and I can't disavow that. Yeah,
I feel like there's parts of America that are very religious, and I'm sure there are parts of California where they're religious too. Especially back then, though, America in general was much more of a religious country.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine all that information of religion and like spouting off names like Judas and Cain, because that was funny what he was saying. It was just listing
He's just
off,
like every evil person.
off bad guys. Yeah, I find it very hard to believe that it was just that it was only that, because they blamed a lot of it on the medication, but all the stuff before the meds. So I wouldn't be surprised.
There's a lot that doesn't check out. It's definitely beyond the natural in some regard. I just don't know what regard. It's fascinating though. This whole subject matter is fascinating, especially now that we have so many less reasons to be enamored with the mysteries of life. There's explanations and information everywhere.
You know what I think could have happened is Amanda Waller could have recruited her to be a part of the Suicide
what
Squad.
needed to happen, you know?
And sent on government missions.
Show up with a gift basket full of flies and spiders and be like, listen, we will keep you stocked. Just come work for me.
That's went on for so many years. I say yes, it was real, because that makes my life more exciting.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I say Maybe.
All I know is these two guys are funny together.
Yeah, I like these videos.
Skeptic versus the believer. The forever debate that we'll have in this country.
Yeah.
And the world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Natalie Doran.
Thanks, Natalie.
That was a spooky-ass video. It was nice to get the true story behind the exorcism of Emily Rose. You can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell to get notified every time one of our videos is up. And check out our Patreon. It's a lot of fun over there.